Hello everyone, Alex here from warnoffkeys.com, and in this video I'm going to cover per server command prefixes. In a previous video I covered per server settings, and this will be using a similar concept. However, in that video I simply just covered a welcome message. However, per server prefixes, or command prefixes rather, is something that is more requested, and so I'm going to be specifically covering that within this video. So I'm going to make a new file. This will be called setprefix.js. Now if you haven't followed my video about creating this advanced command handler here, then you're going to want to watch that. A link will be in the video description. But with that said, we can go ahead and get started by exporting our command object here. So module.exports equals an object, and then the first property will be our commands, and we're just going to have one, which will be called setPrefix. The second one will be minimum arguments, which will be 1, and the third one will be maximum arguments, which will also be 1. We can then say expected args, which will be a string that is used if they provide the incorrect number of arguments. We can just pass in this bot's new command prefix. And then after that, we can say permission error will be you must be an admin to run this command. Then after that, we can add in our permissions. And so the first one we want is just administrator. This will make sure that if they do not have the administrator permission, that the permission error will be sent to them. Then here we can have a callback. This is going to have our message, our arguments, and our text. Now inside of here, we actually need to connect to our Mongo database. And so in order to do that, I need to create a schema, and I'm going to make a new file. This will be called command-prefix-schema.js. And I'm going to import mongoose. So constant mongoose equals require mongoose. And then I'm going to say constant command prefix schema equals mongoose.schema with a capital S. We're going to have an object inside of here. Now this is going to be the guild ID. So underscore ID is going to be a string, which will be required. And then here we can say prefix, which will also be a string, which will be required. Now we can actually export this. So module.exports equals mongoose.model. This has two arguments. The first one is going to be the actual name of the collection, and we can say guild-prefixes. Then the second argument is going to be the actual schema, which we defined previously. So command prefix schema. So now this is done here. We can go ahead and save and close this. Now inside of here, we need to import our Mongo file. So constant mongo equals require Mongo. So we have to go back 2 directories because we're currently inside of 2 directories. And our Mongo file is essentially just a utility that helps us connect to Mongo very easily. Now this callback has to be asynchronous. And inside of here, we can say await Mongo, which gives us our actual Mongo connection within a promise. So we can use .then. We're going to have an asynchronous function here with a mongoose object as our argument. Inside of here, I'm going to try finally to ensure that we always disconnect from mongoose. So mongoose.connection.close. And then inside of the try here, we actually want to update or insert on this actual command prefix schema. And so we can actually import this. So constant command prefix schema equals require. We're going to, let's spell require right. We're going to go back a couple directories and then go into our schemas folder and then get our command prefix schema. Now inside of this, we can say await command prefix schema.find one and update. This has 3 objects as arguments. The first one's going to be an identifier. And so underscore ID needs to be the guild ID. And so we can access that. So by saying const guild equals message.guild.id. We can actually name this guild ID instead. So underscore ID will be guild ID there. And so that's going to be the unique identifier. After that, we need to actually save this. And so we're going to say ID is guild ID again. And then also the prefix will be arguments index 0. And then in the third object right here, we're going to say upsert is true. So whenever this is actually ran for the very first time and no one on that server has actually configured a prefix, it's going to insert it. And that's going to basically insert this object right here into our collection. However, if we have already had this, we're going to then update it. And so upsert is a combination of insert and update. And so what's going to happen is it's going to find the document that matches this unique ID, and it's going to then update it using this information here. So obviously This ID will just override the existing one. It's the same thing, doesn't actually matter. But what's important is now it's going to update the prefix to whatever the command actually has. And then here we can say message.reply. The prefix for this bot is now, and I actually want to use a template literal here. So it is now arguments index 0. We can actually convert that into its own object. So constant prefix equals arguments index 0. And then down here, I can actually just remove this because in ES6, you don't have to repeat yourself like this. It'll understand what you mean. And then now inside of our actual reply here, we can just pass in prefix. It makes it more easy to read. Now let's try this out. I can save this. I can run the bot with node. Okay, so here we get an exception. Required should be true. That's just a mistake on my part. So if I save and close this, I can then restart the bot. Everything seems to be working. However, now we have to actually start up our Mongo server. So I covered how to do that in a previous video. If you've been following along, you know how to do that. So I started that up there, and then I can go and I can open it in Mongo Compass. So now I have it open here. If I go into my Discord bot server, we do not see our schema yet. That's because nothing has been saved so far. So now I can run this command. I can go into my test server. I can run set prefix, and then we're going to use a $, for example. And it says the prefix for this bot is now $. Going into Mongoose, if I click on refresh, I then see guild prefixes. If I click on that, the ID is the actual guild ID and the prefix is now $. So now how do we actually use this? Because I still have to use exclamation point on everything I use here. And so to use this, we can go into our command base file, which is where we're actually handling all of the commands. So now that we have access to this object, we're going to want to always use this object. So whenever the bot starts up, we're going to loop through all of the guilds that the servers are in. And we're going to try and load whatever prefix is for whatever guild. And if that guild doesn't have a prefix, we're going to use this constant prefix right here, which is the global one. And so with that said, I'm going to go back to the bottom of our file, and I'm going to say module.exports.load prefixes. And then inside of here, we need access to the actual client. And here we can say client.guilds.cache.for each. We're going to have an asynchronous function that will have the guild object here. Now we need to import Mongo in this file. So const Mongo equals require. We need to go back a directory, import Mongo. We also need access to our schema. So const command prefix schema equals require. We're going to go back a directory, go into our schemas folder, and then again access to the command prefix schema. And so here we want to actually connect to our Mongo server and then fetch the actual prefix for the specific guild. However, if we connect to our Mongo server in here, they're going to create a bunch of different excess documents that we don't technically need. So we can actually connect to our Mongo server before this for loop. So await Mongo.then, and it's going to give us our callback, so asynchronous mongoose. Now because we're using await here, this function has to be asynchronous. And then inside of here, we can try this. And then finally, we're going to close our connection. So mongoose.connection.close. And now we can actually move this for loop into this try block right here. Now inside of here, we can actually try and get the prefix. So we can say const result equals await command prefix schema.find1. And we're going to have our underscore ID, which is our primary key, be guild.id. Now I can console.log result. And if I save this, we now want to actually run this function here. So if I go back to my main file, I can now import my command base. So constant command base equals require commands/command base. And then I can actually call that. So command base dot load prefixes, passing in our client. I can now save that. And then we can start our bot with node index.js. Okay, so I get a problem here saying topology is closed. That's because this for each loop, but it's not going to actually wait for this to finish. So here I'm going to actually convert this to a normal for loop. So I can say for const guild of client.guilds.cache. And then if we actually console log this guild here, we're going to see that we need to access guild index 1. The reason for that is that this is going to return an array, which will have the ID here and then the actual guild object here. And so we want access to the actual guild object. I can essentially copy this code right here. I can delete this. I can paste it here. And now when we're accessing guild, we need to access guild index 1. Now if I save this and we restart, we then see our result right here. We have our ID, which is the guild ID, and then our prefix, which is exclamation point. Now with that said, going up to the top here, we see guild prefixes, We can actually copy that. Then right here, we can paste it and say guild index1.id is equal to result.prefix. Now we're repeating ourselves right here. So I can actually create a constant called guild ID. And so this equal to guild index1.id. And then I can use that right here. So guild ID. And then I can use it right in here as well. So guild ID. Now after this for loop, I want to console log the actual guild prefixes object. I can save and restart this. We see that our guild prefix object shows this right here. If I were to go into here and run set prefix $, and then I were to restart the bot, we then see that I now have a $sign as my prefix. Now I need to actually use this prefix right here. So I can say const prefix equals guild prefixes index of guild.id or prefix. And so this is the global prefix here. And so I actually want to go through and rename this. We're going to rename this to global prefix. And so this is going to give us this syntax here where we're importing the prefix object or property rather from our config.json file, and as expected. However, we're going to rename it to global prefix. And so scrolling down, whenever we're accessing this, we want to say or global prefix, which is more clear. So now if I save and I restart this, we see we have our $sign. And now if I try to do set prefix with an exclamation point, it doesn't actually do anything. But if I say $set prefix, and let's just set it back to a $sign, it then actually works. So now our prefix is technically a $sign. And this will allow the users or whoever is the administrator to the servers that your bot is in to run this command. By default, it's just an exclamation point. And then that's going to actually change. Just as an example here, we have this add function, which is automatically imported. So if I do exclamation point add 5 and 10, nothing actually happens. But if I do $add 5, 10, it then actually works. This is how you're going to create per server prefixes using Discord.js and MongoDB. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.